Welcome to AS London Wellness Academy. The third video lecture of this unit covers the skin. Now, the skin is the largest and most active organ in the human body, and it has many different functions. Now, the skin acts as a barrier and protector for our internal organs, and it defends deep tissues from harm and any microorganisms. Now, the skin contains our nerve endings, which allow us to experience different senses. It is one of the main excretory organs, and it's an important contributor to regulating our body temperature. Skin is enormously varied from individual to individual, and it differs in colour, elasticity, thickness, texture and suppleness. Now, the variations, all people are different and unique, so on the surface our skin makes us look and feel different. These variances are down to race, age, genetics and your different environmental factors, such as your climate. Now, the colour of our skin can also be affected by rashes, which make the skin look red, jaundice, which makes the skin look slightly yellow, or heart and lung conditions, which can actually create a blue tinge to the skin. Problems with the skin that are caused by external factors can easily be treated. However, any inherited problems cannot, as they are related to an individual's genetics. Now, the elasticity of the skin, not only does it cover a large area, but it needs to stretch and move accordingly. So skin needs to be elastic in order to prevent it from breaking. An example of when skin needs to be elastic is when there is swelling. This requires that the skin needs to stretch and go back into its original place. This occurs due to the elasticity of the skin. Stretching of the skin occurs without a problem. However, in pregnancy or in overweight individuals, this stretching of the skin will leave scar tissue. This scar tissue is known as stretch marks. As people age, the skin will lose its elasticity. This is due to the decrease in a protein substance known as collagen. Now, the decrease causes sagging and wrinkles to appear on the surface, and the lack of elasticity can also cause excess exposure to UV light. Now, the thickness of the human skin differs from person to person and within a single individual. The skin on the eyelids is thin and very sensitive, while the skin on the soles of our feet is actually thick and very coarse. The thickness of our skin will affect its colour. Blood in the subcutaneous layer makes the skin look pink or reddish blue, and your thick skin tends to have a yellow tinge, as it can be seen on the soles of the foot, for example. Now, the suppleness, an oil substance secreted by the skin known as sebum, controls the suppleness of the skin. Your sebum is produced in the sebaceous gland on the scalp and the face, and these glands are particularly found on the forehead, chin and nose. Now, this will account for how oily or greasiness the skin in these areas actually are. The soles in the feet and palms of the hands are the only non-sebum producing areas. Sweating is known as sebum. It secretes sweat as well as sebum. Sweat is produced in response to temperature, known as an insensible perspiration. Now, sweat is also produced as a response to nervousness or fear. This is sensible perspiration, and the epicrine glands produce this emotional sweating. Now, your hair grows all over the body, and this hair is generally very fine. It's known as lanugo hair. Your erector pili muscles are connected to the hair follicles, and these muscles contract in response to stimulus, and this contraction will cause the hair to stand on end. Now, we're going to look at the structure of the skin. It's made up of many different layers. There's a superficial layer known as the epidermis, and this is made of a stratified epithelium. There is a layer lower known as the dermis, and this is made up of your firmer connective tissue. Now, your epidermis has 5 different layers. You have your stratum corneum, which is the outer layer, and it's the horny layer and made up of dead cells. Your stratum lucidum, which is composed of clear protoplasm cells. Your stratum granulosum, known as the granular layer, which contains cells that contain granules. These are thought to be the initial stages of your keratin function. And you have your stratum spinosum, which is a prickle layer, and it consists of many different shaped cells that are held together by thorn-like processes. And you have your stratum germinatum. This is the basal layer and is made up of cylindrical cells that have oblong nuclei. Now, cells in this layer reproduce quickly, and they continue to replace the cells in the superficial layers. Some of the cells in this layer are melanoblasts, and these cells provide some protection from your UV light. Your hair shaft and sweat gland ducts pass through all 5 layers of the epidermis. Now, the basal layer within the epidermis is where cell renewal takes place. New plump cells gradually flatten and break down as they make their way up to the surface of the skin. Upon reaching the surface of the skin, these cells will become shred. The process of the cell changes is known as your keratinization, as the protein keratin is present throughout. So looking at a cross-section of the epidermis then, the outermost layer of the skin is known as the epidermis. It's composed of many sheets of flattened scaly epithelial cells, and this is the thinnest layer of the skin. Its layers are mostly dead cells, and the cells of the epidermis undergo rapid cell division, so your mitosis, and as new cells are produced, they push older cells to the surface of the skin. The older cells become flattened, lose their cellular contents, and begin to make keratin. Keratin is your tough fibrous protein which forms the basic structure of your hair, nails and any calluses. Eventually the keratin producing cells die and form a tough, flexible, waterproof covering on the surface of the skin. Now our thickest epidermis will be found on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. The outer layers of the epidermis shed every 14 to 28 days. And the epidermis contain melanocytes. These are cells that produce melanin, and melanin is the dark brown pigment. The more melanin you have present, the more darker your skin will be. The amount of melanin produced in the skin depends on your two different factors, hereditary and the length of the time that the skin is exposed to UV radiation, which is your tanning. Melanin is important for protection by absorbing the UV radiation from the sun. All people, but especially people with lighter skin, need to minimise this exposure and protect themselves because the UV radiation, which will damage the DNA in our skin cells and can lead to forms of skin cancer, such as your melanoma. There are no blood vessels within the epidermis, which is why we do not bleed if we scratch our skin. Now, on the dermis is made up of your white fibrous tissue, and it's interlaced with your elastic yellow fibres. The dermis contains your blood vessels, your nerves, your lymphatic system, your hair follicles, and your tactile corpulus. The dermis is thicker on the soles of the feet and the palms of the hand, and is made up of only two layers. On the top, the papillary layer, and below is the reticular layer. Now, the dermis is the innermost thick layer of the skin, which is made up of living cells. The dermis lies beneath the epidermis and contains your blood vessels, your nerve endings, your glands, your sense organs, smooth muscles, and hair follicles. The dermis helps us to control our body temperature. So on a cold day, when the body needs to conserve its heat, your blood vessels in the dermis will narrow. On hot days, the blood vessels will widen, which warms the skin and increases heat loss. Tiny muscle fibres attached to your hair follicles contract, and these pull hair upright when you're cold or afraid, and it produces what is known as your goosebumps. Beneath the dermis is the hypodermis, known as your subcutaneous layer, and this is a layer of fat and loose connective tissue that insulates the body and acts as an energy reserve when required. Now, the dermis contains two major types of glands, your sweat glands and your sebaceous glands. These glands pass through the epidermis and release their products at the surface of the skin. Sweat glands produce a watery secretion, which is known as sweat, and the composition of sweat is your urea, your salts and water, as well as other compounds. Now, these secretions are stimulated by nerve impulses that cause the production of sweat when the temperature of the body is raised, and it will help to cool down the body. Sebaceous gland produce sebum. It is this sebum that the epidermis will become flexible and waterproof. The production of sebum is controlled by hormones. Now, the oil glands are usually connected to tiny ducts, known as your exocrine glands, to hair follicles. Sebum coats the surface of the skin and the shafts of the hair, preventing excess water loss, and it will also lubricate and soften your skin and the hair. Sebum is mildly toxic to some bacteria, so its function is protection. If the ducts of oil glands become clogged with excessive amounts of sebum or dead skin cells, the skin disorder acne may result. When first wearing new shoes, the skin on the foot may become subject to friction, and this actually separates the layers of the epidermis, and this will form tissue fluid, and this collection of tissue fluid creates a blister. If the skin is subject to pressure, the rate of mitosis will increase and create a thicker epidermis, and this is known as a callus. So we're going to look at the functions of the skin. You've got secretion, so sebum and sweat is produced, heat regulation. You've got absorption, so the skin is capable of absorbing water and nutrients. Protection, so your stratum corneum protects the body against potentially dangerous and harmful environments. The skin is also waterproof and prevents large amounts of fluid entering the body when bathing. And it also keeps the body's precious liquid inside. You've got elimination, so sweat is eliminated from the skin through evaporation to the atmosphere, and this lowers your body temperature. And you've got sensitivity, so the skin contains nerve endings, and these endings are what allow us to sense our surroundings. Through our skin and nerves, we can sense heat, cold, pain, pressure, and external factors. Our nerves act as a warning system to help our body prepare for sensation.